This session, we will hear from a diverse set of speakers who will explore where we are today, what are the challenges ahead, and how we navigate this landscape of emerging technologies. This session will be moderated by Stefan Dercon, Professor of Economic Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government and a Fellow of Jesus College. Please feel free to read more about Stefan and his organization on Skoll.org. Have a wonderful session, Stefan.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for turning up this morning. We have a great session here today, I hope, around a really important topic. So as was said, my name is Stefan Dercon, so I work here in Oxford as a professor of economic policy. I've just finished a stint as the chief economist of the UK Development Agency, DFID, for 6 years. And I'm back here in academia running a research group that is trying to look at a whole series of challenges and opportunities for very poor people, but also for poor countries' governments in the developing world. Can't help to do a plug. If you want to know more about that, get in touch. We can always look for new partnerships and people to work with. But importantly, and I think why I'm here today, is also I'm the academic director of a commission that's been set up. It's called Pathways for Prosperity. It's a commission on technology inclusive development that is being chaired and set up by Melinda Gates, Strive Misiawa, who is an African banker and philanthropist, and also Sri Marianna Iskander, who's the finance minister of Indonesia, with a distinguished group of people from the tech industry, from policy making, and from academia, who is actually trying to think about these challenges and opportunities related to emerging technologies. Of course, it's all the time in the news. We see any consultancy firm, any big organization putting out reports on the future of work and the whole thing. But one thing is very striking in these reports. It's always typically about London, Detroit, New York, or Sheffield. It doesn't really talk about what's happening in where the majority of the world population is living, and actually what it means for their pathways to get out of poverty in the developing world. It doesn't really talk in great detail on the poor people in Asian countries. It doesn't talk about Africa in great detail. And so this is something with the Commission we want to discuss and debate. And that's for that reason I'm delighted, of course, to be allowed to be here to actually moderate a discussion, because we want to learn from those people who are doing these things. So what are these fundamental challenges and opportunities in the space of livelihoods, job opportunities? Will global value change destroy jobs? Will there be ways of creating more jobs through these type of opportunities? What will it mean for service delivery? Can we actually get access and affordability as a key principle of trying to get service to poor people, and how can technology help us in it? How can we bring citizens closer to government with the emerging technologies, or should we be really scared that the most vulnerable population will definitely be more vulnerable to the kind of worries that we have a lot these days in our countries about privacy and issues? And it's these kind of issues that are at the core. How can we make sure that the challenges are handled well and that the opportunities are harnessed? Within the Commission, what we will be doing is to get the best ideas. We're not going to say this is exactly the 3 things you need to do, but we want to learn from communities like yours, from people here on the panel, in terms of how to actually get the best knowledge and the best sense of how to best navigate this kind of near future around this. And then talk to policymakers to try to give them practical ideas of the kind of things they may well be able to do to actually turn many of these challenges into real opportunities to poor people. So with that, I'm delighted to have a panel here of people who have something really substantive to say from their organizations and from themselves, working in areas that touch close on these issues. And I'm just going to let them introduce themselves briefly first, and then we will allow them to give some of the thoughts around these topics further. So thank you.
My name is Marianna Iskander. I'm the CEO of an organization called Harambe. We are a youth employment accelerator based in South Africa that is trying to work with the private sector and government to build solutions that really tackle the youth unemployment problem. South Africa sits with, by most definitions, the highest youth unemployment rate in the world. And what's required to solve for that has been our journey. We'll talk more about it. Probably two things to say in relation to the panel is we have really had to experiment and think very differently about the channels to both reach young people and change employer behavior, and some of the data that has come from that. I think that the job matching, having attended some of the panels yesterday, I see some of you in the room that were speaking on those panels, the questions of understanding how to think about machine learning and data science in the scary space of job matching, I think is some of the questions that we've also had to grapple with.
I'm Gargee Ghosh. I'm with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I run a team that's focused on addressing the sort of policy and financing challenges associated with uptake and access to new technologies. And I'll say just by way of opening that I'm most excited, I think, about technologies in health and agriculture and sanitation that really have the potential to sort of improve the quality of life for millions of people around the world. And but you know, as with all technologies, I think the story about access, especially for the most vulnerable, is not a given and something we're sort of thinking hard about. So I look forward to that discussion.
Great, and I'm Tara Lyons. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. And the Partnership's a nonprofit foundation based in San Francisco, California, but we're global in scope. It was founded by some of the largest technology companies on the market back in 2016, including Apple, Amazon, Facebook, IBM, Google, Microsoft, DeepMind. And our board is actually comprised of half nonprofit and half for-profit organizations, and includes the ACLU in the US, the MacArthur Foundation, OpenAI, and a few independent nonprofit board directors from academic institutions. And just at a very high level, the partnership is exactly that. It's a multi-stakeholder organization, which is a partnership comprised today of 54 organizations spanning civil society, nonprofit organizations of other types, academic institutions, and for-profit technology companies. And really the core of our mission is in developing and promulgating best practices for responsible technology development. And we have a real interest in making that a global conversation. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about these things.
So Tara, if I may follow up on that, you know, Partnership for AI, you know, it has a commitment to make sure that artificial intelligence has a positive impact on people. We talk a lot about that, but could you be a bit more precise where you think the most important opportunities would be for poor people, not least in the developing world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that the partnership was really founded on the premise that AI holds incredible promise to enhance quality of life for people everywhere. And the people who actually founded it was sort of a union of concerned scientists. In all cases, for the 6 companies that I described being our founding corporate members, it was the directors of research or the directors of AI research that came together to kind of decide what suite of issues we needed to tackle collectively, and to bring CSOs and NGOs and other types of institutions into the conversation. And that being said, there's also a very wide recognition, and this is at the core of our mission as well, that those opportunities can't really be tapped effectively unless we also take into account all the challenges and risks associated with the development of AI technologies, especially because of the asymmetry or potentiality of asymmetry and asymmetries of power in developing platforms related to artificial intelligence, and also acknowledging the fact that many of our founding entities are really the institutions that hold that power right now. And so at the core of the work that we do is sort of this tension between the for-profit and nonprofit entities engaged. In terms of opportunities to enhance life for the developing world, I think that I'm also really excited actually about some of the applications that Gargee discussed. And I think that you know, in general, there's incredible potentiality in healthcare applications in artificial intelligence, which can also access markets that previously have not really had access to those high technology interfaces. You know, we're seeing incredible applications of AI and machine learning and precision agriculture in all sorts of different places, developed and less developed. And I'm really excited about the potentiality of enhancing crop yields and mitigating environmental destruction because of machine intelligence in that field in particular. And also, frankly, I think enhancements to productivity are also another place where I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity and also challenge as well. As with most of these application areas, one of the focus areas of our organization right now is in AI, labor, and the economy, and we're actually concertedly working on looking at the sort of issues that sort of persist and span across both developed and global South-oriented countries. And we also are interested in the differences and questions that we should be asking and answering related to different conditions and economies and constituencies. Mm-hmm.
So to follow up on a couple of the points that you're making. So one, of course, one big latent one is all the time about, the artificial intelligence is reliant on data, on the data science around it. And in very poor countries, the worry is that these people would be even more vulnerable to some of the things that, we are worried about here in our global community these days. So how do you think about it? Are there ways or how are we trying to approach that at least the most vulnerable people can get protected in these areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the partnership is, as a multi-stakeholder organization, deeply, deeply concerned with creating an environment that incites truly participatory behavior amongst the actors that we have involved in our community. So one of the issues, one of the ways in which I suppose we're approaching the issue of potential marginalization in these conversations, which need to be global in scope from our perspective and need to include actors from different types of demographics and constituencies and interest groups that represent traditionally marginalized or potentially at-risk populations. And the way in which we're going about doing that is by concertedly applying energy, force, funding, and attention to this question of how we capacity build in civil society organizations, such that they don't just show up, but they actually are equipped with the tools necessary to have productive conversations with actors like large technology corporations. And the sort of early work that we've done in that area, and I should have said sort of at the beginning of my remarks too that we're actually in the first 6 months of operation as a nonprofit organization, so we're doing some capacity building ourselves. But that being said, we have a concerted interest in, from the get-go, making sure that there isn't this sort of stratification amongst our membership, and that we are drawing constituencies into the types of discussions about technology governance that we're having, who might not otherwise consider themselves a part of the sort of usual suspect or group of usual suspects in these conversations. So for us, that includes special interest groups and advocacy organizations. For us, that includes organizations that defend populations and constituencies that might not normally be drawn into these discussions at an early phase, and be a part of concertedly working to reform, refine, develop, and improve technology development processes. So we're applying funding to that process right now. We're really interested in growing our partner community so that it represents a more globally representative constituency, and that will be a priority of ours, certainly, through the persistence of the organization.
So, I can't help, of course, having some of the words of Mr. Zuckerberg going through my head in the last few days. And, one of the things he said is it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. I'm also struck by, in the context of our commission, we had great conversations with an Indonesian tech entrepreneur and said, he said, whatever government wants to do in my country to regulate me, we will always be ahead. And the technology is ahead. So now, we can say we can harness civil society. Sometimes people will say, oh, well, the answer is regulation. But, regulatory bodies that can't fully understand, as we also have seen, those organizations that need to keep people to account are clearly not very knowledgeable often about some of these things, as we noticed with some senators as well. Then we get similar type of things. So how would the industry think about it? Is this about codes of conduct? Is this about self-regulation? Or is this about market forces getting benign players to come up? Are there any ideas here?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is sort of all of the above. The partnership, I think, is really interested in a full spectrum of potential interventions and solutions. And we understand very well that there are some issue spaces where policymaking really is the best lever, or regulation is the best lever of intervention in applying force and accountability and compliance to structures and questions related to the challenges associated with technology development. And in other ways, I think the technology industry actually has, there's a huge onus on these massive actors. I mean, one of the most interesting things that I learned, previous to this work, I ran AI policy for the Obama administration in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for about 3 years, and we did a study that we output in 2016, which was associated with an AI research and development strategy for the country, and we found that the private sector was investing at 8 times the rate of the federal government in AI research and development, right? So even just the levels of funding going into research and development sort of create this power imbalance between the private sector and the public sector to a certain extent in applying force levers of change against some of these challenges. And so really, I think, and again, I'll just reiterate that I think the actors involved in the partnership are very well aware of that and very interested in being forces for good, right? And then the last thing I'll say too is that there's probably another category of work which is uniquely multi-stakeholder as well, and that includes developing best practices, technical standards, communities of practice around responsible technology development, and also kind of just creating a community that's able to be critically reflective and to have actors be able to trust each other in such a way that they hold each other to account and really have real conversations about the challenges in this space.
Right. Anyway, so I should of course recognize you've only been working as a partnership for 6 months. This is of course a very fast going area, and all the concerns are there. So, but I think we'll have to watch this space in terms of seeing what we're doing. But I'm delighted to hear some of these things that are happening. Also for us as a commission, it's been quite important to make sure that all kinds of ideas come to the table, and it's important, I think, that industry and the stakeholders that it convenes with civil society are very much part of it. So if I may turn to Gargee now. Gargee, of course, the Gates Foundation is not just been working for 6 months, it's been doing this now for quite a while, actually as a leading organization trying to bring technology as part of the solution to developing countries, with a strong bias in favor of what matters for poor people's quality of life and human development, and of course also with considerable success. Now, one of the worries I have, I'm a more development practitioner and economist, is sometimes feeling that a lot of people working in the tech space, they are pushing technology for the sake of technology as a solution, and then looking for a problem where they can apply to it. I don't know, how would you think about it yourself and as the foundation, and how should we think about it, you think?
Yeah, sure, happy to speak to that. Can I start, Stefan, with just a sort of vision of what I'm excited about, what I think the potential is, because I think it's sort of easy to reduce this question of pathways to prosperity to, will the robots take over my job or the job of the garment worker in Bangladesh? And so, where I see potential is certainly in individual technologies. There are some incredible breakthrough science happening in vaccines, for example. We have partners working on messenger RNA technology that will stimulate your body's own antibodies, so sort of a cheaper and easier way of making vaccines, which could lead to breakthroughs in HIV, malaria, etc. But what I'm super excited about is actually bundles of technology, because in very few situations are market failures or system failures the result of just one problem. They're almost always a collection of bottlenecks and breakdowns. And so I think one of the risks that we see is believing that any single technology, any single intervention solves everything in a system. So if you think about agriculture, 75% of the world's poor are rural farmers, and not very productive rural farmers because of the conditions in which they work. So just thinking about the suite of technologies coming up in that area, We are working with a number of partners, including the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science, to develop drought, flood-resistant crops, new types of seeds. Green super rice is a great example of that. But alongside that, the African Soil Information System is building the first ever soil map of Africa to better understand growing conditions. And then you pair that with customer interface, farmer interface platforms like Digital Green, others that are here, to better provide information to farmers and via mobile phones, but actually better information because they're building remote image maps of fields to better understand when to plant, when to harvest. So when you start to put together better crops, better information, better delivery of that information, you start to see the potential for a real transformation. And I think it's that systems view that is sort of the first step in solving some of those challenges.
Right. So that's that's very important, I think, as a point. And just to go a bit further on it, the idea of thinking about systems probably then also means that this kind of, like today, this relative focus on, say, digital technologies or this kind of one solution there may well be a bit misplaced. Is there, are we wrong in the developing world to focus so much on the digital side, or how do you see there? Are we getting to the end of it? Do we need to move to thinking more about other technologies here?
When I look across the areas where we work, a lot of the point of care, point of sale, the user interface is where the digital breakthroughs really matter. But then, as you look behind that in the development chain, the supply chain, there's tons of other technologies that matter. Just to give you another example, in the work we do in sanitation, this is an urban problem more than a rural one. A couple billion people in the world use latrines that don't dispose of sanitation safely, so fecal sludge management is terrible. It gets into open drains and groundwater. Disaster for health, disaster for dignity. And so we've been on this quest to reinvent the toilet. And some of you will have seen my boss, Bill, on the talk shows a couple years ago when we had a tech breakthrough on a standalone toilet that actually recycles fecal matter and the output, the residual output, is actually clean drinking water. Super cool. Super cool if you're into that. It would be foolish to think that just a better toilet would solve the problem, because the breakdown is in the whole sewage management system. And so behind the scenes of that development for the past 10 years, we've also been doing a lot of work to understand, to ground truth what's going wrong in sewage systems and in municipal management of sewage. And we have sort of pilots going that have reached about 22 million people and have really helped us understand, the policy environment, the cost and pricing. We've understood that any technology, all in tech management, maintenance, will have to cost something like 5 cents per user per day. That really affects your target product profile when you understand that. So anyway, that's a way of saying I think that understanding of context and use is a super important place to start, and actually has been much more useful for us than starting from invention and then thinking about use case later.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other risks, I think, by focusing on the technology as a solution before fully understanding of the problem is, I suppose, also that we don't think carefully enough about either the economics or the access of very poor people to it, the economic inclusion type of thing. So, are we getting a good sense of you know, whether that's still a concern. I mean, I'm taking the digital technology side. We can get very excited about it. You know, we hear all the people saying everybody in a developing country has a phone. No, it's probably everybody that you meet, because actually it's still an awful lot of people, not least in very poor and more remote areas, and not least women that don't have access to it. So what is here how should we think about it? Should it caution us with some of these technologies, or how do you think about it also as the foundation?
Yeah, so I think two big lessons in this space that we've learned sometimes the hard way. So one is what we were talking about before, you know, much more productive, useful for us to start by really understanding need and then get to development, versus the other way around. Just, you know, to give you an example of where we've screwed that up, we partnered with a design firm to develop a new planter, a sort of handheld small farm tool to make the planter more productive, to lay more seeds as it rotated. I've seen the new design, it's super cool, but it's not getting used. And it turns out that it's too heavy. It's too heavy for women, who are the main planters of this crop. And we didn't know that because we spent a lot of time in the community, but we talked to the men. And so thankfully it was early prototyping, and so now easy to, you know, fail fast and do all the things you're supposed to do, but that was sort of stupid. But, you know, lesson two is no matter how good the product is, you sort of need an equally good market access strategy. And of course I would say that because that's what I work on, but we just see time and time again that, you know, policy and financing barriers are inhibiting the uptake of even the best technologies. And just on digital, you know, so much of what we talk about, so much of what this group is working on is the sort of mobile interfaces that deliver health information, ag information, you name it, better. But if you look at mobile phone penetration, GSMA, which is the Mobile Phone Industry Association, their numbers are that around the world, women are about 14% less likely to have a phone, and in parts of Asia, that's almost 40%. So if you think that you're going to reach women with better medical care, better, you know, farm advice, we have a ways to go. And you know, that isn't just about the design of the phone. It's not even about the price. That is often the root cause of that differential is often more pernicious, because it's things like registering for a government-issued ID, which you need to get a phone account. So the accompanying policy and sort of market access strategy is almost always just as important as the product itself.
Right. So that seems very clear, and it's so what I take away from this is to think very carefully about all these complementary things that we need to do as well. You know, we may be with digital payment systems or mobile money reach an awful lot of people, and the cost may gone down a lot for all kinds of things, but these complementary things, they do seem to be crucially important here as well. Which is good for me as an economist and not a technology person, that we still have some important work to do. But it's so we can keep on thinking more about it. If I could finally, you know, there is also something that at times has concerned me, and which is essentially the incentives for the development of technology. You know, if the market is going to do it, it's going to focus largely on where the purchasing power is, and that we get, you know, that in the first instance products get developed. You know, if I travel around iHubs across Africa, lots of apps are being developed. It's lots of excitement. It's all middle-class problems being solved by middle-class people, quite a lot of them. But you worry a bit about that. So is there something here also about the science and technology policy environment that actually should be thought about to ensure that it's not just up to maybe the foundation that actually puts money into let's develop the technologies for poor people, but are there other things that maybe we can think about to ensure that the kind of access or the nature of the technology that are developed are low-cost things that poor people could access within their cultural environment?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's lots to do. Two things I would point to are, One, just market knowledge, market intelligence. I think we could do a better job making a public good of the information that we've gathered, understood, but we all probably could, of just sharing our understanding of context, need, sort of, if you will, target product profiles, because that's very hard to do. It's very hard to reinvent every time, and I think that's a real barrier to developers, to entrepreneurs. Obviously, we'll hear from you all on that barrier. The other is incentives, right? So if you believe that the financial ROI of serving the poor is not going to be as great as serving, my mom friends in Washington, D.C., then, that's a clear incentive for the market. In drug development, there have been sort of policy incentives to get around that. There's an orphan drug legislation in the U.S. that creates a sort of an exchangeable benefit to incentivize R&D on diseases of sort of small populations, and so you can imagine a host of policy incentives to sort of fiddle with the natural market incentives here, and I think that's absolutely worth looking into.
That's great. So maybe turning to Marianna, this is from the front line, I would say. This is working on the ground with youth, and I understand. From what I know about your organization, you try very hard to match people from relatively deprived backgrounds to job opportunities. Maybe could you just tell a little bit more about it and how technology is helping you to do this?
I mean, it's hard to follow fecal management to clean water, so I'm gonna do my best. I mean, maybe just a couple of observations to build off what's been said, and then I will get to the question. So we are based in South Africa, and obviously the question of like the disruption of jobs and the fourth industrial, everybody's nodding their heads and what's going to happen. And particularly, I think societies that have had near full employment, it's like, welcome. We've never actually had enough jobs, and so this is like very familiar with the problem and have been thinking hard about it for a long time. I think there's two counterintuitive things that we're seeing in terms of that dynamic. I think the first is that to the extent that what a lot of this disruption is presenting is an opportunity for people who know how to hustle to do well, I think young Africans are actually poised to be ahead of the game on that. Nobody has an expectation of a straight line from school to a tidy job. Nobody has an expectation that it's all going to work out and then my internship's going to come. And so to the extent that what some of this is going to present as an opportunity for people who are used to having to zigzag in their economic life, we have something actually to build off of and to think about how to get young people to imagine pathways as opposed to straight lines to where they're gonna need to go. That's the first observation. The second is what we see, and in our model, we partner with about 450 private sector employers. We've had 1 million young people who have raised their hands to express an interest in our program, 400,000 of whom have come in. I'll explain why there's that gap. And of those, a range of matching methodologies to place many of them into their first job in the private sector. They don't have data on their phone. So, I mean, let me just start by saying they may have a phone. They share a SIM card with 2 or 3 other people. Even getting a hold of them on the phone, let alone being able to imagine data being pushing kind of online content to them as a solution is just, it's a myth. So we can start with that and then try to think about how we've tried to problem solve around some of that. So absolutely, employers are terrified of what automation means. None of them, in my view, really know what the answer is. And in fact, yesterday I was so anxious about the topic, I thought yesterday, let me go to all the sessions on machine learning and AI and just like see what everybody else has figured out. And the good news is everybody's figuring it out. And so thank God the title of the session is Emerging, because I think we're all actually trying to figure it out, is that if you think about the most routine tasks that one does in a job, by all means let the machines do that, because as companies move up the value chain and it's more complex and it requires empathy, it requires customer engagement, hearing what somebody's saying, the humans are better designed for that anyway. And so equipping young people with the kinds of skills that are about their emotive abilities, about their understanding of what a service environment requires, about being able to hear somebody else and respond to them, puts us again in a good position to take advantage, I think counterintuitively, of what a lot of us are kind of worried and positioned. What I will say is a few concrete examples, because I think your point is right. I can only speak from the experience of our customers, which are the young people we serve that are absolutely out of everything, out of every system, out of every economy, is that we have done really three things. The first is we've understood that we have to have a multi-channel approach. In the South African context, the phone is an incredibly important channel. And if I'm a young person and you're calling me from a Cape Town area code and I live in Johannesburg, I'm not going to answer the phone because I'm assuming you're a debt collector. I don't know anybody that lives in another city. And so we've had to learn how to reach young people in a way that they're going to actually pick up the phone. You can't get their consent to do anything if you can't actually reach them. It's trying to understand how to now push content and be able to do things that we think are going to lead to better matching, better understanding, better assessments of who they are by collecting data from them any way that we can. I think that the use of the data, which is I think a lot of building off of some of what you've raised, is so to date we've built a larger data set on unemployed youth than our government. So we have more data on unemployed youth and what is possible to learn from than Stats SA. And the question of what to learn and what to do with that is the one that we puzzle through. The most important thing is that we're using data and a lot of our early models and our careful, I think, learning about a lot of things that is just to validate what we already know. And I can't say how much this technology is about learning faster as opposed to assuming that it's about making decisions that none of us know what the consequences of that are going to be. We absolutely can see the bias that we all know exists in job hiring in the data. And being able to use that as a way to change employer practice, change government policy is kind of the first and easy, most obvious thing. But the second is what the data is also doing. It is absolutely showing us things that I'll give you a very concrete example. We have an early model that shows that there is a correlation between how many people live in your household and the probability of you getting a job. Now, there's a lot of reasons we could probably all hypothesize. Either I have a bigger network, so there's more people in my family. So then what do you do? Do you put orphans at the beginning? Do you put them at the end? It's like, what do you do with that kind of information? Because not every insight is actionable, I think is the point that I want to make. So those are maybe just a few concrete examples of thinking, I think, very differently about how to actually reach the populations that in all of the examples I think that you gave. And if you can't reach them, you can't get their consent. Right. And if you can't get their consent, there's lots of things you can't do. And a lot of, I think, again, the myths of the phone and online and digital being the only channel has not been our lived experience. Right.
So can I just follow up on it? Because in a sense, what you're describing is, and something we're definitely learning, and I'm sure many people in the room are much more experts on this than I am, which is the opportunities both in matching into a labor market, yep, but also matching into tasks. A gig economy, yes. Now, and one of the way you started with saying is, it's one of the important observations, which is that, where in our economy, say in the UK, this may replace other jobs and all the kind of thing. The South African example is that these people are just not matched to anything up to now. So there's actually, there are very few jobs to be destroyed in South Africa from these kind of things. This is all about getting more connectivity, proximity through actually, and whether it's in tasks, gig economy type of thing, or actually in jobs. Now, I know a few things about South Africa. It's not known for its very liberal approach to labor markets. And it's known to have, if I may put it bluntly, at times screwed up quite badly in terms of actually allowing growth to take place and huge protection of a few jobs. And you may have a president, but he has a background in particular types of organizations as well who have played a part in some of these protection things. Now, I'm not saying that they will do wrong or right, but one of the things is that I keep on struck in a country like South Africa is how will government react? Because there could be a knee-jerk reaction in terms of, oh, let's be worried that you have more data than the state has. Let's be worried that you are actually getting people into jobs, but maybe not with the same nature of protection and the kind of things that the others had, or with the same benefits and the whole thing. So how do you maneuver that space?
Well, I feel like now is probably the time nobody will throw stones about societies and presidents and governments and the like. And so I feel like your observations are absolutely spot on. South Africa has some of the most restrictive labor legislation. It's complicated. It's because they have a strong labor movement and trade unionists who have, I think, tried to understand their role in a society. I think our observation is that every society can think of a lot of things people can do to improve that society. And so if we give, again, some concrete examples of that, is we have innovated to get young people to do childcare work in a regulated environment, because that is a desperate need in a community. It is a thing that a young person, if appropriately matched, so we had to develop a very innovative assessment to match for your capability to take care of children, your capability to love children. Men can do it too, and thinking very differently about trying to begin to solve for social needs by giving people an opportunity to stay engaged and be productive. So absolutely the myth that everybody's gonna have an employer, I mean, gone already, that everybody's gonna look like they have a job that is a traditional, I go to a 9-to-5 job, gone already. That doesn't mean that there aren't many avenues and, again, pathways that young people can engage themselves in something. And if we get it right, they never have to see that as the end. They may not all move to the next thing, but definitely some of them can. And the way that the model is set up at Harambee is if I can see that somebody like me got ahead, I know I can get ahead. And that sense of that you are not at the end, because pathways in society, you may very well end up being the CEO of a big bank. It's just unlikely you're gonna start there. And so I feel like the question, and the global interest in our model, in my mind, has come from that. Because those are not foreign questions to the UK, to the US, to many, and certainly most African societies, is how do we find ways to get as many people doing productive things that they don't have to see as the end destination, while we all try to solve the problem of growth. Yes. And the last point I would make is that the majority of our leadership time at Harambee is not on the matching, it's on finding ways to generate growth and new jobs in the economy, because the sectors where labor is the constraint to growth, if we can show that there is a strategic solution to that, investment will, and we've seen it, investment comes in those sectors where there's real opportunity for new job creation to supplement these other pathways.
Yes, no, and I think that's really interesting, is that, because what you allude to as well is that how important it is with communities like these here in the room, that we actually find a way of communicating about how to turn some of these fears about these things into opportunities, but in a sensible way. And I think you're also absolutely right. It will look different in South Africa with its own cultural and political connotations than it will look in Indonesia or in India. And we'll have to have that sufficient context specificity to have these dialogues about, you know, what is the nature of regulation, of taxation, yes, of control, and to actually turn these opportunities into
people are more the same than they are different. And I mean, so you're right. The context and the demand side and what economies look like, but young people are all afraid of many things. They're afraid of their first job. They're afraid of, like, will their peers accept them if they try to speak in English when they haven't been speaking in English in a long time. And I think if you tap into some of these things that are quite universal, we'll all get to the answers more quickly.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just looking at the other panelists, whether you want to add anything or shall we go to the floor? If you want to jump in now. Okay, so I think, sorry?
Yeah, let's go to the floor.
Let's go to the floor. And, you know, I will propose that actually, you know, it's not crucial that you ask a question. What is crucial that you're concise and precise and short.
Well said.
You know, we can have a discussion, but no long 10-minute statements. But make a point and it's fine. We don't have to have anyone answering it. Let's have a bit of a discussion. It's about these opportunities, turning these challenges into opportunities, turning the job opportunities, making sure that they're there, or whatever you want to add to the things you've heard. And I think there's already people behind you. Let's go around and yeah, we can go here and then we will collect a few and then we will see what we do with it.
Good morning, and thanks for the discussion. I'm with Dalberg, leading all the big data and AI work at Dalberg. Basically, one big issue that we are running into is the operationalization of everything that we have been developing in AI and big data. I mean, it's pretty hard to go for economic sustainability or social acceptance when we develop something and then connecting to the existing systems that these countries have in place. These countries, I mean, all the emerging countries. I mean, I don't mean the US, Europe, or Japan. I mean, really, we work a lot in Uganda or Haiti, for instance. I mean, when we try to operationalize something over there, it's pretty hard. what do you think we should do to increase and to accelerate the operationalization and the implementation of all these solutions? Because I know that we are still in a piloting phase even here, but what do you see we can do more to accelerate that?
Okay, so let's take a few more here. There was one, the same row, I think. Yeah, side. Yeah, and then we can go to the back.
All right. Hi. My name is Ramesh Srinivasan. Met a couple of you. I'm a professor at UCLA, looking at questions of digital technology and data and the internet, particularly in the context of the global South and indigenous and vulnerable populations. You know, and as I was listening and taking notes, I was thinking about how it's not sort of fixed, but there are some distinctions between tools and, you know, and very sort of specific, like, for example, the toilet that you mentioned, and sort of technologies that are sort of interactive and learning from people in different populations. And with learning technologies, I was thinking about the underlying models by which technologies learn from people and have the capacity to be governed by these populations, so that it's not sort of Western models that are exported onto peoples who have very different value systems, but instead the models and the technologies themselves have the opportunity to be governed and therefore produce other sorts of unanticipated outcomes economically, educationally, and so on. So this is just a kind of a long way of saying, what are the sort of cultural models that are influencing the ways in which we are developing and designing technologies, and actually where those communities themselves can be in power over the design of technologies, rather than just sort of seeing it as this exporting of tools or systems. Thank you.
There was a question there. Oh.
Hi, I'm Paul Masick with the World Cocoa Foundation. I'd be very interested in hearing from the three panelists how you're approaching the issue of policy and regulatory creation in the developing world, particularly around issues that we've seen in the headlines just over the last couple of weeks around data privacy. You know, my impression is that the private sector and the technology solutions are rolling out very, very quickly at a rapid scale. And it's very difficult for these countries to actually put in place appropriate, responsible, state-of-the-art, best practice policy and regulatory environment. And I think that may end up becoming the constraining factor in actually taking a lot of these solutions to scale. So I'd be interested in hearing your plans or your thoughts or experiences on that. Thank you.
Okay, and we can go there, back.
Hi, Dan Ariely from Duke. You know, we try to kind of say AI as a one thing, and I wonder if it's better to have two separate discussions. There's one use of AI for maybe what we can call abusive technologies, trying to convince people to buy or to spend their time or to do something that is not necessarily in their best interest, but in the best interest of another company. And I think most of the companies you mentioned as partnership on AI seem to belong to that category. And then there's another approach that helps crops. You know, and it's maybe not just the question of AI, is what is it a service on? So that's one layer. And the second layer is we know that the very poor, everything is more expensive for them. Money, of course, is more expensive, time is more expensive, attention is more expensive, transportation. They pay more for everything, right? They pay more for toilet paper, they pay more for anything you want. And because of that, I think that AI that is at the service of people, like getting them more information about rain and crops, is going to be extra useful for the people who have very little attention and time and so on. And on the other hand, the abusive technologies are going to be extra harmful for them for the same reason. And you know, just kind of jumbling everything. So I think there's kind of a 2x2, like every professor. You know, there's kind of the is it at the aim, is the technology at the aid of people or at the aid of the company that is producing it, first and foremost? And then the second question is, what is the ability of people to express their own interest and have more free will versus don't have time, attention, and so on? And I really worried, like your starting question was about, are these technologies going to be abusive? And I think they have a tremendous capacity to be most abusive for the most vulnerable people unless we decide to do something about it. I don't think self-regulation would work.
So if I just may, for the sake to have a conversation also with people, so what would you do then?
That's not fair. You don't ask...
I said we were not necessarily going to ask him questions.
You don't ask an academic what would you do.
Yes.
So the reality is that I think this is the place where the free market is not going to work, right? So if you think about, I think a lot about self-control, right? Our ability to resist temptation, and if we all think about it, we all fell to temptation lots of time. I had way too many drinks last night. I ate too much this morning, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one. Sure. I went to the bathroom earlier. There were some of you that didn't wash their hands. I mean, we know that people mess up on self-control, and these are really the problems, right? Sure. So Facebook Google comes, whatever they want, and they say, we want you to buy something right now where you have other interests. You want to save your money for seeds. You want to do things for the long term, and they want you to do something for the short term. And I think we need to develop technologies that help people fight self-control. And if you think about it, it's kind of an amazing thing that we are allowing companies to penetrate our lives, our phones, our TVs, our homes, whenever they want, right? And of course, you can turn notification off and so on, but we're not really being very thoughtful in this tremendous penetration of privacy. And I think it's because we don't understand how effective these technologies are. Maybe now with Cambridge Analytics, we're becoming a bit more understanding, but I think we have to regulate that, and we can't assume that Facebook and Google and Amazon will do the right job.
So good. Okay, so you said the words there at the end. That's where you came to. So maybe a comment there, lady there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl Hicks from the Toilet Board Coalition. So I'm very happy to hear all of the toilet talk, which is very unexpected in this forum. We're a private sector coalition focused on business solutions for sanitation to reach universal access. And so we're really interested in that access question and really excited about the possibilities of new technologies to bring the access closer. And so, for example, as Gargee was saying, we can imagine a lot of new things, and we're starting to see a lot of new opportunities. So we can imagine every time you go to the bathroom or to the toilet in the morning, you should be able to get a read on your vitals or read on the nutritious value of the food or drink that you had the night before. These are things that are very much within our reach. And if you take that to the poor, populations that don't have health access, where there are taboos in going to a clinic. We talked yesterday in a healthcare session, and it was really all about new technologies once people came to the clinic. But we're seeing that actually that access of people getting to the clinic is a huge barrier. So what if the toilet could become that center of health information that everyone has access to? And so I'd love to know from the panel, this is very much at the beginning and very interested in the commissions and consortia that are starting to look at these things, and I think we need to move faster. And so we'd love to combine efforts around some of that work.
Right, okay, maybe just in front of you there.
Hi, I'm Obi Felton from X, Alphabet's Moonshot Factory. So, Marianna, I was really interested about your remarks in terms of non-linear career paths and how in Africa people don't have those expectations that people have in the West. I think that's really interesting. And particularly this shift from talking about jobs being replaced by automation to skills focus, I think is really important. McKinsey actually did a great report, the Global Institute last year, if people haven't seen it, on exactly that. That is not necessarily entire jobs that are replaced, but bits of jobs. So I'm curious about what are the skills that we do have to teach young people to deal with this new world? And you called out one, which is really interesting, which is emotions, because arguably that's the last thing that machines are going to be good at, right? So that's going to be our last advantage as humans. But also, how do you work with machines, right? Which sort of plays into what Dan was talking about. How do we learn how to interact with this technology so that we can harness it for our goods instead of the technology controlling ourselves? And people often think of this as factory floor operators, but I actually think almost every job is about how do we interact with machines. And if you look at, for instance, I worked as a secretary when I was 20, and most of my job was typing out letters. My admin doesn't do any of that. You know, she books my travel, she organizes projects effectively. So that job has completely changed, and she harnesses the machines to her good. So what do we have to teach our young people in order to do that? Because I think that's actually the key of surviving and thriving in this new world where the technology will continue to evolve at a ridiculously fast pace. You know, I work in it, I see it every day. That's not going to change at all. It's all about how do we deal with it as humans and make it work for us as opposed to the other way around.
Okay, so I thought of one at the back there, and then we'll come briefly back here if you want to say something. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Angeline Mrimirwa. I work with Camfed. I was born, bred, and raised in the so-called third world in Africa. And thank you so much, the panelists. I wanted to ask particularly Gargee. And thank you so much for being honest about getting into a community and talking to men about a women's issue. So I really appreciate that. So my question is, you know, you were talking about policing and financing being some of the greatest inhibitors to the uptake of the most promising of technology. So I wanted to find out from your work if you've had any experience in Africa of a policy that's favorable to technology, to the uptake of technology that you could share. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe you don't have to reply to anything or pick something. Maybe you can start, Marianna.
I mean, maybe just to respond to that and pick up on one or two other points. We had the privilege through the RippleWorks Foundation of having a Silicon Valley expert come spend time with us who is like at the forefront of how quickly technology is changing. And he honestly said that like the most sustainable skill is cooking. And that if you don't actually know how to cook, that would be the thing to do to make sure that you have a job, you know, for eternity. And so I think that the short answer to your question is twofold. The exposure to machines and comfort with technology, you're absolutely right. I can think of a young woman who was born to code. So our population of young people can code at the same rate as the general population. She didn't have a computer. Right? And so let's just start with the basics of just getting that sorted out. But the fear of the machine had to get resolved, and then it was fine. I would say that the breaking down jobs to tasks, what employers across the economy are saying is it's lateral thinking, it's just all those skills around how do I problem solve, which is why the secretary job looks so different today than what it did in the past. My closing comment maybe that picks up on some of these other points is I guess the power of proximity as a theme is that we shouldn't like decide what technology is and isn't on offer for a lot of people who haven't had it. And so I think just to be cautious and careful in saying that sometimes the privilege of excess may allow us to draw conclusions ahead of people who don't get notifications about anything or aren't bothered by technology entering their lives in many ways. And I think that our lived experience is that I think young people are going to actually have better answers. And so like asking the customer and staying focused on what the kind of end user actually really needs is likely to help us understand the difference between what technologies are going to be abusive and which ones are actually going to serve the public interest and the common good.
Okay. Gargee?
Sure, yeah. Well, so first of all, I should say I have a 5-year-old who's going to be thrilled to know that toilet humor was a big part of the panel discussion today. But I'd like to go back to Angie's question, World Cocoa, UCLA, Delberg. I think there's a common theme there on what's the kind of local policy environment that will facilitate and accelerate uptake and good use. So first of all, just to say, I think that is one of the most important questions as I see kind of the next decades. It's what underscored our interest in the Pathways to Prosperity Commission that Stefan opened with. A couple of ways to think about that. First, probably the most sort of profound version of that question that has stuck with me came from a Minister of Finance who we both know, who is on a strong role among the most sort of intelligent but well-connected, best access to information, who was saying, you know, I know from my interaction with my citizens on social media that their expectations are high of how much technology is going to change their lives. But I don't know where to start. You know, I've been reading up on it, and one day I think drones and drone delivery is going to overcome the supply chain issues I have in, you know, healthcare, education, whatever. The next day I think, oh God, the robots are stealing the job. You know, and so to me that was just sort of a glaring message on we've got to do better in how we not curate, but support decision makers in the local adoption and localization of all of these technologies. I would maybe push back on the one of the questions. A lot of the innovation that we see actually is local. It's not always just happening in Silicon Valley and exported. But the policy environment has to localize it even more, right? Because even when it's local innovation, there's this tension between the private sector innovating and government caretaker role, regulator role. I think Angie, to your question, the India example on digital financial inclusion is one that I think we could look to, not because it's perfect, but because they are ahead in the way India has built this stack of policy to build up to the adoption of financial inclusion, starting with Aadhaar, their unique ID system, building on correspondent banking licenses. So the way they've sort of decomposed the policy decisions required to get to universal financial access and then built up piece by piece in ways that allows them to really have the debate internally about where they want to be on free market versus regulation, protection, access for the poor. I think that's a space that we're watching very closely.
Okay.
That's great. Yeah, I'll just pick up in the middle of where Gargee left off, which was around how we best equip decision makers, like policymakers, for example, to make the right types of decisions about governance related to technology. And I think this is something that's also core to the work and mission of the Partnership on AI as well. Everything that we do is motivated by an understanding that, frankly, the field of artificial intelligence doesn't really understand how to measure progress for itself. It's really challenging to grapple with the implications of technology applications, as we've seen demonstrated even just this week in the hearings that you described, Stefan, and in other contexts. And so I think a part of the answer there in terms of bridging the gap and in translation between policymakers and technologists, but also policymakers of different sorts and different jurisdictions with different needs and requirements and levels of understanding is in really making sure that, that there is more of a capability of technologists to translate the work that they're doing from a research and development perspective and from a product development perspective into materials and understandings that can be easily sort of normatively contextualized within policy environments. And so that's a huge challenge, and it's you know, advancing public understanding generally about these technologies is something also that the partnership is committed to doing, and that you know, equally approaches informing consumers and empowering them to make decisions about the way in which they use technology in their daily lives as it does decision makers like policymakers. I think another thing to mention too is just that a big part of this as well is in making sure that the global discussions being had are not exempting you know, actors who are not necessarily at the forefront of technology development. And so, you know, some of that work is happening in standards development right now, where there's increasing efforts made to try to draw global actors and governments that don't necessarily have huge AI-focused economies or tech-focused economies into discussions about the implications of standards development. Another part of that too is in economic development opportunity that's being done by some of the companies and NGOs involved in the partnership, and I think that work is really important to trying to bridge that policy gap as well. And then the last thing I'll say, just overarchingly, and I think this touches on a number of questions that we've discussed through the course of today's session and some of the themes that we've touched on, but you know, I really think technology is not destiny, right? And that informs, I think that sort of idea needs to inform policymaking as much as it does technology development itself. And it's really important, I think, to focus on the fact that technology is really just a series of decisions that humans make, and in most cases we are those humans in the partnership, and And so holding ourselves to account and having organizations with interests in holding actors with power in the technology development space to account is really, I think, going to be a requirement. And you know, that gets to some of the questions that have been risen related to skepticism around self-regulation and other issues. But again, I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Excellent. So we have still a bit of time. We can do another round. And I would propose I haven't been looking very well at the side, so the very end there and here then later on as well. And then we'll come back to the front here.
Thank you. We're one of the partners in the Partnership for AI. I'm Kirk Hansen from the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University, which is in Silicon Valley. And I think the reason we have joined with Tara and the partnership is because of a different answer to the question about looking at this as darkness or lightness. I think whatever the regulatory regime or the governance regime is a number of years from now, it's going to have elements of public policy, it's going to have elements of best practices by the individual institutions, and it's going to have some elements around leadership best practices, or what we tend to think of as leadership ethics behavior. And all three are going to be important. Just to give one example of the best practices, one of the things that's resulted already from our engagement is a project with Google and with Omidyar Network to design a training program for all of those coders and engineers who are writing the AI software to help them raise the right kinds of questions in the process of writing the software and the algorithms. And it's an experiment. We're not going to get it right the first time, but that's a kind of best practice that hopefully down the line will have a big impact on how AI rolls out through society. So I just would suggest that engagement, it's always been a belief of engagement with the corporations, engagement with the public policymakers, engagement with the individuals on the ground that are putting this to work for good is really critical.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, very end, back there.
Stefan and the panel, thanks for a great session. My name is Matt Steen from DFAT, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We've been supporting some modelling around technology adoption curves against industries and against skill sets, and we're seeing a massive difference in what we're seeing as to the future of even employment in agriculture and employment in manufacturing versus what some of the countries that we're looking at, particularly in places like South Asia, are predicting in terms of where they're wanting things like manufacturing and agriculture employment to be going. Just for a very, very small example, we're seeing a lot of onshoring in manufacturing, so not just replacing jobs, replacing activities, but jobs being lost. My 70-year-old father in North Queensland still sits in his tractor today only because he likes to sit in his tractor as it drives up and down the rows with GPS, being far more productive than the hundreds of people that used to farm the land. How much do you think, do we have a shared understanding and a shared model of really what is going to happen to employment? And, who is really talking about what we're going to do if things aren't as rosy as sometimes in this conversation we sort of say everyone's just going to be creative and interact with technology if there is massive social disruption?
Excellent. Yes, please. We'll come then. So there first, and then we'll come down gradually, yes. This one, okay.
Thank you all. I'm Valerie Short. I'm with the Royal Bank of Canada. And I just wanted to address 2 points. The first is that we have just completed it was a year-long review of skills required for the future of work in Canada. It was developed for two reasons. Number one, we are a significant investor in technology in terms of Borealis, artificial intelligence, blockchain. We have 82,000 employees, and we are also committed to preparing young people for the future of work. It's a $500 million commitment over 10 years. So the study that we did was to map the future of employment and jobs in Canada over the next 10 years. We mapped that against the skill sets that are required for each of those jobs. We compartmentalize them into clusters so that we could extract from that what would be the core skills required for the future of work. We came up with 6 clusters. We identified all the same components that we have here in terms of critical thinking, collaboration, communication, digital and financial literacy, not necessarily a future of coders, but really understanding how to interact with them. But the call to action from that was that Canada needed to move from a jobs economy to a skills economy. We needed to build resilience in young people by arming them with a portfolio of skills and helping them understand how those skills could navigate across a number of different job categories. And then we also mapped each of those job categories or clusters, how vulnerable were each of those to technology, so that they could then move forward in a sense of control, resilience, rather than the fear that we're all feeling. So I would just support, again, Marianna's view that young people have a lot more commonality than we think. Some of the things that we're all talking about apply to, you know, the Aboriginal youth in Canada, the unemployment youth in Canada, as well as others. So I think that I would encourage you to look at it. The report, interestingly, is called Humans Wanted. And I think that the methodology applied is also very much applicable to many other jurisdictions.
Well, thank you very much. So very quick, we have we're slowly running out of time. I hope if you can make it very concise, brief comments. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to talk. I'm Angelique Rigos from the MIT Tata Center. We develop technologies for developing countries. We work in the field, and one of the things that we've discovered in several projects is that we develop tests so that we can identify the nutrients or what's wrong with the soil or what's wrong with the water. And what you find out is that people don't want to know if there's something wrong, like my water has arsenic or fluoride, if you can't give me a solution right now. So, and it turns out in actual, you know, the governments know that there's contamination, but they don't deal with it because they can't deal with it. So I think you have to couple technology with a solution. I mean, both of them have to be technologies. The other thing I think in terms of when you work with people in the field, it turns out that you can get different answers depending on who's in the room. So if you have the same discussion with a group of people, it's not, we talk to the women, but if there are men in the same room, it's a different answer than if it's just women in a room.
Okay, so the final comment here from the front, I'm afraid, going to run out of time.
Hi, I'm Jill Finlayson from Singularity University, and our focus is on using exponential technologies for impact. Do want to echo the comment about the future of work. We actually have a chair on that, and also to echo the comment on ethics, because that's something that we're trying to work into our curriculum with startups. But my question for the panel is, how do we get more of the innovators who are using these exceptional technologies to create impactful startups rather than, you know, the next dog wearable?
Okay, that's a very small question. I know there were a few more hands now. I apologize we can't do, but I want to just quickly for, you know, a very short final comment from people of the panel, and then I'll close, okay?
I have one sentence. So everybody's terrified about shared massive disruption. I think that's the urgency that drives the work that we're doing. My observation is that, my observation is that actually, like industrial policy, labor market, people are not using real-time data. And so we're talking about jobs without looking at the populations. And I think that the answer actually lies in the who's in the room. I know you made that comment about another topic, is getting enough actors at a society level to be able to take on these future of work questions, because no one sector is going to solve it on its own.
Sure. I actually want to ask you to speak to the employment question, because what strikes me is that the situation is very different depending on where you're looking at. Yes, people, I take that point, but you know, in Asia, Bangladesh is already losing its garment working industry or the pace of its growth. It's not true in Africa, which, you know, doesn't have the manufacturing jobs to start with. So there's slightly different questions. And also to the point about solutions, therefore slightly different solutions and policy solutions as well.
I just want to agree with some of the points previously made about the importance of the stakeholders involved in these conversations, and I think, again, somebody was talking about ethics and the interest that we have generally speaking, and holding corporations to account for some of these decisions. And I think that just to circle back to some of those lines of questions, it's also really important to think of innovation along other lines than just technology as well. And I think in considering innovation, it's really important to think about things related to fiduciary responsibility and innovation, and corporate social responsibility innovation, and market force innovation, to circle back to the incentive question that we talked about very early on in the panel. Because I think that kind of upending some of those models is also as equally important, again, related to systemic approaches to challenges as are technology solutions.
Right. So it's for me now just to wrap up, and look, it's by the nature of this topic that we have far more questions than actually people can sensibly answer. Many of the questions that you from the room are posing are questions that we're all grappling with, and we can keep on discussing. Now it makes it exciting as well, but it also makes it very important that we need to get the best ideas to get them together. There's a really interesting contrast here, or a kind of a balancing act between, Marianna and also others in the room, to emphasize the universality of some of the challenges that they are. At the same time, this is with my hat, I would say, but the specificity in terms of how we can actually solve in particular context. And Gargee was talking to this as well, and the whole debates on the future of work. It's definitely one area I would say, please start having a better understanding of what's happening actually in terms of jobs in South Africa, in other parts of Africa, and in Asia, to not make the mistakes and simply saying Uber in New York is the same as Gojek in motorbike taxis in Indonesia. It's actually very different underlying markets with very different challenges of regulation and policy that we actually should be thinking about. Look, it's an exciting area. I think I picked up quite a few things, which is around, challenges of regulation, but definitely the thing we definitely can agree on is the education of policymakers. That's an important part, where we can go. There's things to do with education of skills. Nobody gave an answer. And I think partly it's because we're all struggling with it. What is it going to be? Yeah, young people will have to be more flexible, and to do it, how we get education systems for it. And then keep on emphasizing, keep that lens on the southern reality, the reality in developing countries, in the south, and in different places is actually quite different. So making sure that we don't simply get simple solutions that seem to be relevant for London, that we're going to export it. There's areas like, for example, financial regulation, when we are worried about terrorism, money laundering, that we've actually put back whole banking sectors in developing countries because we set up things that were perfect for Europe and for the US. It's these kind of things that we're going to get to as well. I'm getting all kinds of signals that we need to stop. Please send to the Pathways for Prosperity Commission anything you have as documents, ideas, things. We will process them, we'll bring them together. We want to be a platform for the best ideas. We'll be working with all the people here on the panel as well. And then fill in, finally, your little survey that you need to do. And now I'm actually getting a thumbs up. Now I've done my duty. That's the right thing for Skoll. This is the end of it, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much.